Well, here we go. It's Friday afternoon. Time for our Ask a CMA panel. I'm switching up the music. And with me today, thank you again for being here, Jamie from Australia. I still don't know how you're doing this, man.
For the love of the topic.
I think mate is appropriate, right? Is that
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah.
It's my Australian accent is not. I'm not even gonna try. We keep having this conversation. I'm German and I live in Switzerland, so people keep asking if I speak Swiss German. I'm not gonna try. Been living here for 16 years. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Hey Freddie, happy Friday! Thanks for being here. Awesome that you joined. I'm very happy to see you. All right, let's get going. Today we wanted to talk a little bit about a little more about the CSDM data model that we have been hinting at already, I think 2 weeks ago. We had a first discussion about it. And well, there's always more CSDM to talk. And since we cannot yet talk about CSDM 5, I heard it's going to come out soon-ish. I wanted to dive still into the CSDM4. One of the main reasons for doing so is because I think there is still a lot of people who work with the CSDM4 and are still on the verge of actually implementing it. I myself am currently involved in one project where the customer is trying to build these things out, and for them, I don't actually believe it would matter too much whether it would be CSDM 4 or 5. Hey, Maximilian, thanks for joining. And I was wondering how many active projects people still have around this, just as an intro, and then we dive in a little bit into the structures of CSDM. We have only hinted at some value last time. I would like to go into the actual domains this time. Jamie, how many projects do you actually work on?
Well, it seems to be really hot in Australia at the moment. A lot of companies are looking at implementing their CMDB, and obviously they've heard about the CSDM. I've got two projects coming up. Two projects are coming up. One I did a bit of advisory on last year, and one that I am doing, just running a couple of workshops for at the moment. So that's four within 6 months of each other. So yeah, I just think that it seems like there's a lot to do with CMDB in Australia at the moment. I think it's been neglected in the past, and people are now starting to understand the value. Yeah. I can't hear you. Nope. I can hear something now.
What's going on?
I can hear you now.
I seem to have a bit of, yeah, I see there's an issue. So how about, is that better?
Yep.
Yeah, I have some technical issues here. I apologize. We have one, Freddie has just mentioned they have two projects going on. And I think you're not wrong. People have shun away from the actual effort that is involved with a CSDM project because they need to get their stuff in order, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, hey, we discover a couple of things, we throw them into the CMDB just in the right classes, and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And we're going to actually go a little more into the approach. I know we had a discussion last time about what to go for first. From my perspective, there is still a lot going on with CSDM, and I have one customer in particular with
6-digit user number, and they are very much looking into building these things out, the portfolio and their services. And it's a question of structuring them correctly. From my perspective, it is not so much a question to get it right in the first throw, just to get the right idea and move forward at all on structuring the services. If they get it wrong, you reclassify some things, you restructure some things. It is fine. It will never be static, and I think that's one of the things that you should consider when you build the CSDM, right? Not only build your portfolio once, but make sure that you have the right roles in place to keep building it and keep evolving.
Yeah, and I think the CSDM is quite flexible. So as long as you keep to those guardrails, right, and keep to that framework, I think it can be quite flexible. Last time there was a question around business application versus application, right? And
Yes.
and I think you could go ahead and ignore the CSDM and implement the application on the application table, but it doesn't have all the fields that you might want to track, like your user base, what type of platform it is, those kind of things. And so if you start bastardizing that table with all that information, you're going to find it's not flexible. So if you can get some foundational things right in the first place, and you're using the right record to hold the right information, it's all about relationships, and you can change those relationships to suit your needs, right? So I think for that reason, it is flexible. And I think when I've run workshops, customers are worried that they're going to get the model wrong, right? And taking them through that journey, and they model a service. Two people model it differently, but it both suits the purpose, right? So it's
yeah. So let's look at the chat here. Freddie thinks that people are not in the right mindset. They think they need to get it right in the first run, and I think that's correct. It's not just a CSDM topic. Having not the agile mindset, like still thinking waterfall, right? We're starting somewhere, we're building it out in the back end, we're dropping it, and then it needs to be fitting, right? And it's very much a thing still, that even after, I don't know how long have been people been building agile, right? And not being agile, like really totally Scrum adjacent thing, 100%, and just having a little bit of an iterative mindset. There is a huge gap between that, from my perspective. And I think you don't need to be 100% Scrum or anything in that regard to be agile. And even that for people seems to be a huge mindset. Or mindset change. And so I'm with Freddie on this one. He is, from my perspective, 100% correct. And it is a challenge to even get that part in. So coming to this idea of starting with something and then reclassifying it is for some people already mind-boggling, right?
Yeah. Interesting what Maximilian has said there about.
I'm just reading it.
About starting with business applications and application services in the crawl phase, and then going to walk. What's your usual recommendation when you implement, CSDM, CMDB for the first time for somebody?
Honestly,
I always target the walk, and I always target walk, and I give my reasons why. And usually there's good buy-in, and there's some work to do, right? But I usually target walk because I think it's a good place to start, because you end up with being able to manage your your infrastructure. So typically they want to get going on, discovery and service mapping. So getting the foundation, well, it's not foundation, getting the first kind of business application services, their CIs, and then just some basic technical services and service offerings to help with automating the population of the non-discoverable data. So that's what I typically advise, and I've had quite successful, first phase with that.
And it's not wrong. From my perspective, a lot of customers already struggle before crawling. They're struggling down here in the foundation data. Even getting that right is such a huge step, and it is such an important step to getting things right down the road when you walk or crawl. It doesn't really matter if you want to crawl or walk, but if your group concept already is completely off, or your company data, and company data is a huge topic, is completely off and unstructured, then you're going to struggle down the road. And I think rather than spending time trying to get your business applications to 90%, or getting your application services to 90%, I think a lot of companies should look into the question: is our company data actually correct? And that is when you walk down the road a little further and you look at what's behind the next corner. Why are we doing this? And that comes back to the question, are we starting with business applications or application services a little bit? What is it that we're trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? It should always be our question. What's the value behind it? And that very much tells us what kind of data we need. Do we need application services? Do we need business applications? And Mehmet has he unfortunately is out sick today. He was scheduled to be here. So I'm taking that kind of stick up from him. He is usually a very big advocate of screw business applications. No one needs that stuff. Because what would you do with the business application? No ITSM process that you want to implement actually refers to the business applications. And he's not wrong. I think he's spot on with that. So application services, I think, is a very, very important table. However, and it is important if you look down the road and you want to do the service mapping. However, I don't bother filling that thing up 100%. So, and here is where I think ServiceNow is not entirely correct in their crawl, walk, run approach. The business services and the technical services come a little earlier, but the business service come very much towards the end.
If at all.
Sorry?
Right? If at all.
Yeah.
I know customers that don't need to be there. They're really focused on their infrastructure. They want to do software asset management, hardware asset management, and they don't necessarily want to worry about that kind of sell-consume stage.
Right.
They're quite happy. They're quite happy to sit just in that managed technical, so that they can, just focus on IT.
Right. I'm trying not to focus too much on IT, and from that perspective, business services are important. But from my perspective, they should be in the approach earlier. And you should, when you're trying to talk to your customer, and we are doing that right now, try to figure out what's the difference between the technical and the business services, and bring in a first draft of this. And yes, Maximilian, business applications are no longer there. However, the construct and what they are there for, this is still very much there in 5, right? It's the digital product, if I'm not mistaken. And we are going to talk about digital products down the road, not today, but we will have a 5.0 panel, which in which I also want to talk about migrating from 4 to 5. If you have already 4 enabled. However, I think not lots of people do have a highly mature 4.0 even applied. Right. So let's look into the question, what then? So Jamie, you mentioned you would be going for a couple of simple technical service, bringing IT in, and I think you're right. We should be absolutely doing that. When you structure your technical service, what's usually the challenges that you are facing there?
Well, the customers just don't understand. They're like, what's it for? And I'm typically of the opinion that it should be quite aligned to kind of their IT organization, and how they want to separate each type of technology, and it comes down to who manages and who supports things. And so I actually like to start with that dynamic CI group and get them thinking about, okay, the purpose of the dynamic CI group is to help you populate your non-discoverable data. So then you can, obviously, in change management, you can drive approvals, and you obviously don't have a million records to manage. You might only have 100 or whatever, and then get them into the idea of, are you just Australia? Are you Australia and Asia? And then start thinking about, your Windows servers. Are your Windows servers managed by one team, or is it Windows servers Australia, Windows servers Philippines? And then that it starts them thinking, right? And I think going back to how I was saying about targeting that walk phase, not just crawl. I think it's partly education, right? So one of the best practices to build a team. So you need to build that team, educate them, bring them on the journey. You don't want to train them at the end. You want to get them involved up front, get them familiar with the terminology, get them familiar. So when you start really simple and they get familiar with it, when you come in for a second phase, they've had time to kind of like really understand it, and they come up in with more ideas and more data, right? So you can tune it better.
I think the idea with the dynamic CI groups is actually quite good. I haven't considered that. But yeah, I see the same issue, or the same kind of approach, trying to break things down into the question, who. And this is something that I see that a lot of customers in the past as well are struggling with. They are trying to bring things together from a topic perspective, and that's correct, but they forgot the people who work with these things, and how a support process could look. And we're coming back to the question, why are we doing that, right? We're breaking things down with the purpose of enhancing our service experience, our support experience, right? Automating things, and that means structuring things correctly, which comes down to what you just said. Maximilian just writes, my challenge with technical service is getting the customer into the service mindset, especially in IT for IT use cases. It gets very tricky how to define a service and a service offering. And there's also the question again in there, who is supporting these things and what is part of their support? And especially in the IT for IT area, I think it's not actually too difficult to say, you have been supporting something X, a product or whatever, but you were not just doing that. You were doing things around that, and that's just part of your service now. And we just need to find a way to define what all is considered to doing that, and what all organizational measures are around this. And whenever someone is asking, yeah, but what is the question between an IT, a technical service, and a technical service offering, I understand that it is difficult to think about that, and I have a certain approach. Jamie, what do you do in this area?
See, when it comes to the technical side of things, I guess I try and understand how their IT as a whole runs, and do they have a network engineering team? Do they have a server engineering team? And then start having a look at kind of like what groups they are, and then from those service offerings, working out kind of possibly a one-to-one mapping, depending on the complexity of service offering to the dynamic CI group. So, server engineering as the technical service, and then service offering might be Windows server, and then Linux server, cloud server. They might have different teams that support that kind of that infrastructure. They might not. They might all be the same team, and then using the dynamic CI groups to target kind of who supports what. And it is a hard topic. It's a hard topic because they've got to do some work. Like, I can't just come in and say this is a standard set of service offerings. But in saying that, I think I told you, I was speaking to you last week or the week before about this was not on the stream, saying how I've discovered it's the TBM taxonomy. I'll have to have a look for it. TBM, I think it's the TBM taxonomy, and it's like a forum where they've come together and created a taxonomy structure for different organizations, and they actually give recommendations on how you structure your services. So it's quite interesting. I haven't had the time to get my head around it, but it's definitely something that's on my list of things to look at, because I think that will help customers being able to bring in a sample for their industry, specific to their industry, for them to get a bit of an idea of how to structure these things.
Right. I'm going a little bit of a different route. There you go, Maximilian's the TBM Council website linked up. Thank you very much for that. When I talk to a customer about especially the technical services and the breakdown into service offerings, I go to something that's within the ServiceNow CSDM data model. Obviously, the organizational structure plays a big role in this, right? And one of the key phrases that I utter is, if you don't have a service offering and you don't want to bother with that structure, then don't. However, if you want, for example, to measure SLAs, there's a way in ServiceNow to connect a service offering directly with an SLA, right? It's a service commitment. And these commitments are a little bit of a building block that I use to explain why there are different offerings in a service. And SLAs are actually a very good example even, right? This entire idea of gold, silver, bronze support is a good way to explain to people how a service offering might differ from a technical service, the idea of bringing then different CI groups, like you mentioned, the dynamic CI groups, connect them to these different offerings based on their support level, even if it's the same support group, right? That kind of usually triggers some thought process, and people start understanding what this is there for, because it is something that they relate they can relate to from their daily life, right? Having a different support level on every mobile plan is something that we deal with daily, so that there's some sort of an understanding there, and that certainly you could even go ahead and say, but for high priority support, we have a different group that takes care of these things. But you don't need to. I encourage, if you want to go with SLAs and so on, and you have that already on your roadmap, go with at least one service offering, and then you have your supporting service. I like to call the technical services supporting services, because that also helps understanding what they are there for. In this, what Maximilian called the IT for IT idea, right? Having a supporting service kind of triggers the same idea of thinking about why we are doing these breakdowns and who are the people who are consuming these services. Freddie has a question. How does CSDM support elastic compute, where their compute modules are only there for a short time, then are destroyed? What level should this be tracked at? Oof, that's a very good question.
When you level as in what domain?
Let's keep that question open, Freddie. Is that a question on the CI level in the domains, or is it a more of a building question? I'm not quite sure where you're going with this. Let's dive a little deeper into the dynamic CI groups, which is something that you already hinted at, that you're working with that quite a lot. I know a lot of people struggle with the idea of dynamic CI groups in general, and they'd rather have an application service directly relate to an offering rather than using dynamic CI groups. Can you elaborate why you would choose one or the other?
Why I would choose what over the other? Which one?
An application service. So you could basically relate an application service to a technical service offering directly, and then have the application service relationships to the different CIs that support it, versus what you mentioned, having the dynamic CI group, as we can see here in the model. I think, yeah, it's right there. Having the dynamic CI group essentially relate to a technical service offering.
So I guess that technical service to the applications, the technical service offering to application service. I guess I don't think it's not something that I always recommend. I don't say you have to have it, right?
No, you don't.
No, so we might have the application service with all the infrastructure related to it, some dynamic CI groups, keeping it basic. But then in it as a first phase, and then as a second phase, we might get more into it, where our application, so maybe a technical service for applications, like business apps, and then having a service offering that depends on application service. So if they're using event management and that application service goes down, that their technical service offering is impacted, right? Because that particular group is responsible for that application stack, right?
Correct.
So yeah, that's the route that I take with it.
I see. Okay. When you approach dynamic CI groups,
yeah,
how do you break it to the customer that they have to kind of bring things together, and what's your method of gathering this data? What can you share for people out there?
Yeah, so I want to see their org structure. I also want to see their group setup. So I want to have a look at what assignment groups they've got. And then, start talk and bring in the topic of like accountability. So who's responsible for what? And obviously because a lot of the infrastructure CIs you want to be using for impact analysis, in change management, in incident, right? So, and you want to have the right level of approvals and whatever. So it might even be that we bring in the change manager and discuss, how do you know when something needs approval from, from not just the direct kind of who owns this CI, but kind of related services. And they'll be like, oh, we've got a list of, just through experience, we've got a spreadsheet. It's like, okay, bring that spreadsheet out and let's look at it and let's talk about it, right? And so we can get some good data from there. Yeah, that's how I would approach that. But I think I said last time, these things take a long time, right? So they need to do their own analysis, right? They can pass me spreadsheets and I can provide recommendations, but I don't have the context about their business, right? So I need to guide them as much as I can, and then they've usually got day jobs, and it's really hard to get people committed into making decisions.
I agree, and this is one of the issues that I've seen in every CSDM project, is the time commitment that you have to have to actually classify and collect the data. Even collecting the data, getting the classification right is already difficult, because you need to have someone who understands how it works. But then finding the time to actually collecting it is going to be a big challenge, and it is regardless of CSDM or not. I think it's a challenge in every CMDB project that I've been in the past. Is now we have data. Do we have all of it?
Yeah,
that is a real deal. And it's not related to the model itself. I have had people who cast doubt on the model because it doesn't help them to overcome this issue.
Yeah. It's funny. One of the recent projects, it's just an introduction meeting that I've had so far. They said, the data isn't matching our spreadsheets. And I'm like, okay, so how accurate are your spreadsheets? And they're like, they're very accurate. And it's like, are they really? So, so Discovery's found more infrastructure than what they've got in their logs. And it's like, well, there's no magic pill, right? It's just going to say, oh, these are the wrong CIs. These are wrong, right? Like, you have to spend the time to analyze that, right?
And it's kind of sad, and I wonder if OCM is one of the correct way. I mean, the governance part of every project should kind of cover this, and obviously you need to correctly communicate in the beginning what that means when you go for this model, what the outcomes are supposed to be, and what kind of effort comes in with that, right? But it's really sad that people do not invest the necessary resources in getting this foundational model right.
Yeah.
I'd rather spend a bunch of weeks on this more and less on flashy features that look good, but without this data are basically worthless.
Yeah.
It's something that I think we, in our role as advisors, need to be very focused on to make sure that, if not, and this comes in addition to everything that we said, if not the fly stage, then at least to a stage that supports the scope of our implementation projects,
Yeah.
and make sure that whenever you do something like that, you identify what is the data that we actually need to have in a structured way to be able to get value out in the program that we are running at the moment.
Yeah. And that's, yeah. So I agree with that. And when you're talking about, why do we need all these services and that kind of thing, it's like, well, you don't. But
You don't.
how do you report at the moment? And quite often, and this is something I usually uncover when I'm doing kind of like an incident management implementation, and they are gung ho on having 50 different categories and a million subcategories, right? And they're like, oh, it's an application issue, and and then the subcategory is Outlook or something like that, right? And I'm like, why do you do that? And they're like, because we always have. And I'm like, who actually reports on how many Outlook issues you've had, right? Like who makes business decisions about that data?
No
Right?
one does.
Nobody. I'm like, but don't you want to start being service centric about service delivery and how effective you deliver your services? So don't you think you should get out of the mindset of like category, subcategory, and start focusing on what are my services and how well are my services performing, right? And it's getting them out of that legacy mindset of right, and then they once they start understanding that, they're like, okay, now I understand why we're going to implement some basic services or however far they want to go with it.
Yeah.
Because in the end, the CIO is probably saying, hey, I need, we're getting complaints about the service that we provide, and we need to elevate our service delivery, right? Not we need to elevate our Outlook support, right? So so having that kind of like view on it and getting them to shift their mind to being service centric, then they start seeing the value, and then
Ivan just mentioned that he's recently found out that you can make the category dependent on a reference field, example, the service or the offering. Yeah, that's correct. You can do that. You've been able to do that for a while now. I think ServiceNow even suggests, though, that if you are using services, that you get rid of the category, subcategory fields entirely, which is met usually with a lot of resistance. But once you do it, you're happy you did it.
Yeah.
So I would not bother with category, subcategory at all anymore when you utilize service and service offering. And here is what I think is a little misleading in the implementation, but that's why you have your partner and they are supposed to tell you these things, right? When you open a default incident form, you can enter whatever. It's all there. You have categories, you have services, you have CIs, you have all of it, and you don't know what it means. You don't know. And there is, aside from the trainings and experience at the end of the day, there's relatively little guidance on how to approach this really. And that's why a lot of people who don't take this time, they have everything and then it doesn't work in the end, or it doesn't work and it's very inconsistent on how things are entered. And you need to make sure that based on your reporting needs, because a report at the end of the day is a steering instrument. It is an instrument to understand what's going on and take the correct actions. That's why you have dashboards in the first place, right? And you need to make sure that these things that you want to report on are kind of mandatory.
And that's always a challenge, right? It's always a challenge to make things mandatory. And I mean, this isn't to do with the CSDM, but an example is assignment group, right? If you have assignment group as always mandatory, then you can't use auto assignment rules to automatically route, right? Because they only run server side, right? And then if you're forced to populate a service and a service offering, but you're not sure which service and service offering, then you're likely just to punch in anything and then it's wrong, right? So there's always that kind of, do you make something mandatory on the first creation, or do you make it mandatory once you put it in progress, say? And I typically go with the advice of start with start with something like listing the application service, right? So I know that it might be Outlook, right, as an application service, and then if you don't know what service offering or business service that it relates to, depending on what they've got. Once the form's saved, if you've got service mapping, you can open the dependency map and you can kind of see that data. So the service desk can kind of be trained to use that dependency map to go, oh, okay, so it's not Outlook. I'm just trying to think. Your corporate email service, business service, right, might rely on Outlook, right? So corporate messaging, but you might have something else that relies on Outlook too. And so opening that dependency map, you can kind of see what's the context of the incident. And then you can go, oh, it's not around corporate incident. It's more about you maybe email addresses are wrong or something. It's maybe to do with like a SAP integration or something, right? So it just gives a bit more context, right? And so rather than forcing people to mark these fields as something, otherwise they can't save the record, it's always a double-edged sword, right? It's like finding that sweet spot that works for the customer.
And that very much comes also down to, exactly, what is the customer used to? And at the end of the day, and we're coming back to this tool that you're employing, it is the organizational change management. If you're changing how people need to work, you need to tell them that. And how often have we seen implementations where they were just not told what to do?
Especially doing a CMDB project on an instance that's been in use for several years. Because they know how to use service now. They don't need change management. It's like, yeah, they do, and they're just not willing to invest in that time, right?
Oh God. Or are these instances where you have old school change management and a CMDB that doesn't really do impact analysis. Those are fun. And then people don't understand how things work together.
Yeah. But I think this comes back to something I said last time, is bringing people on the journey and then showing the value to them, right? Not obviously you've got to show the value to the project sponsor and the people who are investing in it, but you've got to show the value to the end, like who's using this on a daily basis to get their buy-in, right? So it's about hey, you can get this piece of data really quick, or you can make this decision really quick, and like showing that value gets that buy-in, gets people interested, and then they're willing to learn and they're willing to change the way that they do things because they see the value, especially like change managers, right? If you can tell them that at a click of a button, you can message, 7 service owners because they're potentially impacted by something, rather than getting your Excel spreadsheet out and then trying to find the trail of all these different services. They love it. Absolutely love it.
And don't get me started on CAP meetings. I mean, that was actually an eye-opener for me, utilizing CAP meetings based on impacted services and stuff like that. That's really cool. And that is actual value where your deeper processes that go beyond just opening a ticket and closing it, because, thousands and thousands. But having an actual informed decision making supported by the automation of the platform, that is where we have actual value. And I'm looking forward to seeing that in the with the new technology that has been introduced or is going to be introduced with Yokohama, with the Agentics AI. If that actually does work properly and we get suggestions that we need to approve, then rather, I mean, we're going to do an AI panel at some point when this is all, when we actually see it and it works and we have had our hands on this. But an AI is only as good as the data behind it. And having a proper data model that is defined of what you find in there and what kind of element is being used to represent what, makes the AI work better in the end. Because it is stupid at the end of the end. It's not stupid, but it is it's relying on certain structures, and it needs certain structures to train the model, right? And a CSDM will properly implemented CSDM will always improve the results of any sort of automation, and in particular in AI integration, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I've had a lot of questions in the past few years, since the start of ChatGPT. That seems to be like the spark for everything. Obviously, AI was happening a long time before that, but that was where people started consciously going to AI for, efficiency. And they're like, okay, so where do I start with the AI? And I'm like, look, a few years ago, I wasn't too cluey on the whole AI, and I was like, well, obviously, like the customers, a lot of customer focus is IT, and I'm like, well, virtual agent, you want people to self-resolve, do you want your agents to be more productive so they can get the answers to issues quicker? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, how well is your knowledge management process? And they're like, non-existent. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Like most companies I don't know. They just don't invest in the knowledge, right? And I'm like, well, one thing you could start thinking about doing is implement a knowledge process, because if you want to rely on self-service, improving self-service and speeding up resolution through knowledge, you need to have good knowledge. You don't want to have 2-year-old knowledge that's out of date, and you're just going to go around in circles. And they're like, okay, so that's a good starting point. And I don't know, I have to admit, I'm not too cluey on the Now Assist features of ServiceNow. I understand it, but I'm not sure about the AI that they provide. Does it train on just the company's data, or is it also ServiceNow's data, which...
No, I think it's the data model is built. It's it's a data model that is being trained not in your company, but it utilizes the data as well. I haven't done an implementation myself yet. I'm yet to do it. But what you can also do is you can connect with the there's a connector where you can basically grab another language model from a different provider like Azure or something like that. And bring that in. Freddie unfortunately had to drop. He is the expert, and I'm going to make an entire AI panel just with him on this, just because he knows his stuff around AI and in particular on the Now platform. So should you guys have the chance to meet Freddie at the Knowledge Conference, if he's there, absolutely give this man a drink because he knows his shit. And we'll see him on the podcast eventually. Yeah, but it's interesting that you said that with the knowledge database, because it comes down to both, right? Be it the agent, a human agent relying on the knowledge, be it a self-service approach, or be it an AI agent, they all need to understand what it is that they are supposed to do. Even an AI agent will only, it will contextualize any sorts of input, go somewhere and figure out what they need to do. And if you don't have that, and knowledge management is a way to go. I said that in 2011. I met a person, I don't know which company he worked for, but I had a very, very lengthy conversation with him in San Diego on the Knowledge Conference. And he was like, he doesn't understand why people don't invest in knowledge management. Because everything that we are trying is to reduce or make it more efficient how the agents work. Get, deflection, self-service, or provide them with the necessary tools. But we don't. As long as we do not curate any sort of knowledge database, we're not helping them. They just rely on their experience and on, hey, I've seen this before. And that goes well beyond the CSDM. But understanding what it's supposed to do and telling people what's in there and documenting these things properly is a key to success anyways. Well, we spend a lot of time today on the managed technical service, and I think that was not my plan. I wanted to go through other domains. Well, we'll come back. We do more of these panels with other domains as well. One thing though on the technical domain, and I wonder, did you ever run into a situation where it wouldn't quite be enough in the way, or it would, from a conceptual perspective, not fit an actual need in a company, where you would run to the end of the capabilities and structures of the CSDM?
No, I haven't, not personally. No, I haven't.
It's interesting. I used to have, I'm not sure if he's on the panel, in my former company, we had a bit of a discussion that the CSDM has a little bit of an issue when you talk about things like Microsoft services, all sorts of Outlook, Office, and so on, and modeling that into application services, technical and business services. That seems to be a bit of an issue. It's not meant really to do that.
In what way?
You don't know where to put things.
Yeah.
I haven't bothered, honestly, to go too deep into that. But I remember that having been an issue in the past, trying to model all sorts of Office 365 stuff into the CSDM.
Okay. I mean, I've done it at that kind of application service and business application level.
Right.
And then having dependencies from one application service to another application service. So Microsoft Office 365 and then Outlook.
Mm.
And then some of the other services that kind of that Office 365 depends on. So obviously 365 is like a broad term, right? There's a lot within it. So, and it comes down to reporting. Does somebody want to keep their eye on that high level? We've got an impact to Office 365, or do we say, we've got an impact to Outlook, right? And it's how they want to. And this is where I was saying that, like, when I start these workshops and I give exercise to the audience, the people in the workshop, and I say, right, now that we've kind of like agreed that we're going to like kind of target walk, and we've had some conversations about your data, and let's look at this learning experience of modeling it yourself. I give them a PowerPoint template with some things they can drag and drop, and then we might talk through Active Directory, right? So we might talk through Active Directory, and then everybody has their own version, right? And then, but it sparks conversation, and then they're talking to each other, and I'm just facilitating, right? And then they come out with the model that suits them the best.
And I think that's the key. Yeah, I think that's the key, because, and I have seen that in the past, that it is expected of the person who comes in to come up with a best practice, and that's not wrong. Bringing in the experience, what you've seen, and some, like I said, I've been struggling with Microsoft, or a lot of these platform approaches. SAP is another good example. That thing is a freaking nightmare. And how to structure SAP in technical services and then some business services. Bringing in the correct audience. That is a very dynamic thing, and there is. You can give advice, and you can say, no, it's definitely not that, because it doesn't work. But at the end of the day, it very much comes down to, and that's how we started, to the question, how do we actually work with it? Who is working with it? And what are you trying to achieve? And that's not the same in every organization. And that's why there is no one size fits all approach from my perspective.
Yeah. And exactly. And, again, I like the best practices are there for a reason, set your direction, build a team, design your data model, not design your data model, then think about how it's going to be used. Think about it up front. And I do have some standard slides that I put together that's kind of like, depending on the project, right? A lot of the projects that are coming up lately are actually ITAM, so a lot of software asset management stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And so they need a solid CMDB to be able to do the software asset management stuff. And so I do have kind of like some different outcome-based slides, which is, okay, so we're focused on ITAM. So what is it that we want to get out of this? How we're going to measure our success? And then how are we going to get there? What are the things that we're going to do? Or if it's a company who's like, hey, it's like, why do you want a CMDB? And they're like, compliance, right? So we have to manage our risk with external vendors, and we need to show that we're auditing to the shareholders. So it's coming from a different perspective. They're not coming from a software licensing, and they're not coming from an IT support. They're coming from a risk.
Yeah.
So understanding that, it's like, okay, so, do we need to go into the technical services? Like, because what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to assess kind of, you're wanting to be in that design phase where you're wanting to assess kind of how many users you've got on a platform and what the criticality is of that business application, and those kind of things, and what kind of data is stored on there. So, is it a highly sensitive system, or, especially in the banking world? So then you're like, okay, so then we need to focus on that. We need to focus on that design. Or it could be that one of my customers at the moment, they're an MSP, right? So they're really focused on that consume. So they're really focused on consume, not necessarily the individual CIs, even though they do have some, because they're managing millions and millions and millions of CIs across hundreds of companies. They're really focused on that sell consume, right? So you've got to set that direction up front to really determine, are we going to waste our time trying to work out technical services and service offerings when this is an MSP and we're only really worried about that consume, domain. So always set in that direction.
And that is kind of what I mentioned, I think, in the beginning or somewhere around when we started. I said, understand when you decide if you need the walk, crawl, run approach, what is it that you try to achieve, and what data do you want to focus on? And this is pretty much what you just mentioned, right? If you go ITSM, you want your technical services and all the CIs. If you don't, then you might need different kind of entities, which, by the way, on the risk management, I think is even the term, right? Entities.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of time for this week. I enjoyed it very much. We didn't get to the sell consume part. We didn't get to the design part. But I think since most implementations are kind of focused on the ITSM part, still, managed technical services is an important domain. And we're going to be back. For those who will watch this later and who are still in stream, Jamie has disclosed that he plans to releasing some blog articles around CSDM. So keep an eye out for that in the ServiceNow community. Thanks, Jamie, for that kind of effort. I'm going to be a regular consumer of that, 100%. And thanks for being here. For everyone else, happy Friday, everybody. I hope to see you next time. I am actually not sure if I can make it next week. It very much depends a little bit on the schedule. We're going to change the schedule around a bit. Also, not everyone has time every Friday. So thanks, Jamie, for being here.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Happy Friday.